All right. We are in a point in John where things are going to be rapid fire. We just got to where Jesus had prayed for the disciples and had prayed for the world. And we just, we're getting to the portion where he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's about to be betrayed. And it's important to note that through all of this, we're going to look at, in the next few weeks, we're going to look at a lot of various places. And so tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this passage first, where Jesus is betrayed, because it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of explanation that needs to be done in this. And then we're all going to go on a virtual trip. And so turn with me to John chapter 18. John chapter 18. And we'll begin in verse 1. After Jesus had said these things, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas took a company of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. And I'll stop right here and explain this just a little bit. So Judas went away while the disciples and all them were in the upper room. He went off and he went and got the chief priests to come. It was Jesus' hour had came, and it was time for this to be all put into motion. So more than likely, Judas said, hey, we're going to go back. We're going to go to the upper room. We're going to see if Jesus is there. He wasn't there. And then Judas was probably like, okay, I know where he's going because we met there a lot. And so some commentators say that there was a crowd that was following Judas. What this meant, we don't really know. But if you think of it, it was the Passover time, so there had to be a lot of security there as well. And so probably the chief of priests gathered all the security that he had around them and went out to find Jesus. So there was a lot of people, more than just 12 guys, 13 guys including Jesus. There was a lot of them coming up after Jesus in the garden. Verse 4, then Jesus, knowing everything that was about to happen to him, went out and said to them, who is it that you are seeking? Jesus is of Nazareth, they answered. I am he, Jesus told them. Judas, who betrayed him, was also standing with them. When Jesus told them, I am he, they stepped back and fell to the ground. This is important. In other Gospels, when Judas betrays Jesus, they said they're going to betray him with a kiss. That did happen, but John just omitted this portion out because he's focusing right here, like he has in the rest of the scriptures that he has written about Jesus' deity. Okay, he's focusing right here to where he says, I am he. The power that Jesus had coming out of his mouth blew them to the ground. That happened before too, right? Not with those coming around, but when Jesus said, I am, when God said, I am to Moses, it kind of blew him back a little bit. He is using the I am statements, that he is equal with the Father. Verse 8, I told you, verse 7. Then he asked them again, who is it that you are seeking? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. I told you, I am he, Jesus replied. So if you're looking for me, let these men go. This was to fulfill the words that he had said, I have not lost one of those you have given to me. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Peter he was very zealous, right? He was very zealous for the Lord. And he was not going to let anybody take his Savior away. Remember what was going to happen with Peter a little bit later on in the day. What was going to happen? He was going to deny him. He was going to deny him not once, but twice, and even 3 times. But at this moment, he was very courageous, and he wanted to fight for the Lord. At that time, Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword away. Am I not to drink the cup the Father has given to me?" Jesus is telling them, do not fight on his behalf. He has to go through this alone. Then the company of soldiers, the commander, and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus and tied him up. First, they led him to Annas, since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be better for one man to die for the people. And we're going to stop right there. Jesus was taken into captivity. His time had came. And he was going to go through all of these trials alone. He was going to be crushed like an olive, pressed out where the oil comes out. He was going to be crushed like that. The best part of an olive is the olive oil, in my opinion. That's the best part of it. And in fact, we just learned this from Mandy and Stephen. They have an olive tree growing in their backyard. And they said, you know there's only one olive tree? One olive tree. And you see green olives and black olives there at the store. It's just a matter of the ripeness. The green ones are not as ripe. The black ones have been ripe a little too long. But an olive, and in the Garden of Gethsemane, what we're going to see here in just a little bit, was a grove of olive trees. This again might have been a prophecy of Jesus being crushed and poured out like oil here. Now, I hope you're with me because we are going to go on a little virtual trip. Go ahead and hit cut, Michael. We're going to go on this virtual trip, and we're going to go to Jerusalem. All right, we're going to go to Jerusalem. First of all, I want to show you this map, and I'm going to point out a little bit of places. We're going to see what the map looked like at the time of Jesus, and then we're going to visit it today. So right here is the traditional site of the upper room. And then when they left, they came out of this gate, went over through the Kidron Valley, which was around over here, and then they went up to Gethsemane. That's where they are right at this moment. And everything during these next couple of hours, 8 hours or so that Jesus is there, 12 hours, is going to happen within these vicinities. So we had the Last Supper in the upper room, the Garden of Gethsemane, and then we have, come back, here's Jesus before the high priest's house. They're going to take him later on, then they're going to go to Antipas, his palace. Then they're going to bring him back to Herod. I don't see that one. Oh, yeah, they're going to come right back here. And then finally, Golgotha, the crucifixion. We will see there's 2 possible locations of where Golgotha was, and we're going to look at both of those as well. So just look at this. This is the Temple Mount right here. Remember this. This is the temple where it's at. And at this very spot today is the Dome of the Rock. So keep that in mind as well. We're going to look at that there. And the Garden of Gethsemane was within hundreds of yards of that spot. So let me go back and show you some other places. This is the Mount of Olives. If you look at that, this is the Mount of Olives overlooking from the bottom left corner. You can see that is the southern wall right there. And so this is where the Mount of Olives would have been, maybe kind of even more to the left. Yes, this is the cemetery. And this is actually a picture from the cemetery overlooking the Dome of the Rock. So see, this is only hundreds of yards away from the temple. And now we're going to look at this wonderful little map. It looks very, very busy, doesn't it? It's because it's all buildings. You see that? It's a satellite view. But let's look at, this is a driving view, so we're going to show you just a little bit of where places are. So when I switch it back to, the satellite view, we're going to know where everything's at. Right here is the Temple Mount, the Cupola de la Chain of the Chain, the Cupola of the Chain. That is where, on the actual temple, that's where the sacrifices were made. Here's the cemetery that we were looking at in the picture. And Gethsemane was right behind it. Right behind that. Well, here's... Google Maps shows it as Catholic cemetery. We're on a trip now. No, so there's a cemetery right there. Then the Garden of Gethsemane is right here. The western wall, the Last Supper, the upper room was probably right here, and this is where we're going to visit first. And you're going to get to see what it looks like now. It didn't look like this at the time because once things had happened in Jerusalem, what happened in 70 AD? Do you know what happened in 70 AD? Oh, the Romans came in there and destroyed everything. So the upper room was turned into a mosque. And it is not a mosque anymore. So we're going to start right here at the upper room. And you can see it's also where King David's tomb is, right here. But let's look at, this is what it looks like right now. This is the street. Whoop, this goes a little bit fast. So this is the street right outside of where the upper room is. We'll look up, and you'll see just a little bit around there where it's at. And then we're going to go into where it's at. So there's the street, and then let's go inside the upper room. This, I have no idea how old this building is. Old, very old, thousands of years old. This is where possibly, and all of these sites we're going to look at, they are a possibility of where these things happened. Okay, these are the traditional sites that came about. Now, when these events happened, and we notice that John even wrote the Bible, or John wrote his gospel years later after Christ's death. So when this stuff was actually happening, they didn't put a little marker saying, okay, this was the upper room, this is where it was. This is where Jesus got taken in the garden. These are just traditional sites where back in, I think, the 3rd or 4th century, under Constantine, they were looking for these Orthodox places to raise up as holy places. So are these the exact spots? We don't know. Is it fun to think about? Sure, it's fun to think about. But they've gone back through history and kind of looked and said, kind of narrowed it down. We do know where some specific spots are. Like, we know where the temple was, because that has been fought over for thousands upon thousands of years. So this is the traditional upper room, and the room was above what is now a chapel. So you can see you can see the little remnants of where it was once a mosque. You can see there's some Arabic on the wall. Then we're going to look a little bit more. And this has audio in it too. But see, you can see where there was some damage done and they had replaced them. It's just a good little picture in your mind. So when you're reading these verses, to think about where some stuff might have actually happened. So after they went there, they left the upper room and they traveled. Let me zoom out. They traveled to Gethsemane. Today you can walk from this upper room to the Garden of Gethsemane in 22 minutes. That is what Google says. Okay. Just saying, you can't believe everything on the, yeah. So right here where it looks like probably your pastures right now, red and dead, that is a cemetery right there. And right behind it, there's a little star. It says Gethsemane. And we're going to click on this, and we're going to look at some photos of where possibly Jesus was taken into captivity. You see, look how big those olive trees are. There it is. Look how big those are. So we're at the Garden of Gethsemane. Now let's do something really fun. And we're going to drag this little person, and we're going to drop him right here. This is a church. Right now, this is a church building. It wasn't there when Jesus was taken into captivity. But all throughout this part, this is where they think Jesus was taken, because it was in the Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the actual location of where it was at. And if you look, we're going to turn around and we're going to look. That is the eastern wall. Right there. That is the eastern wall. Not very far from where the upper room was. And you see that it's on an embankment. It was built up. It was built up high. So when they took him from this location, and they took him back through these gates to the temple into the area to meet with both Ananias and Caiaphas. So we're going to go there, and we're going to take a stop at the Temple Mount. Okay? So when I said there was the eastern wall, you probably can't see where my pointer is, but you can see with this there's a straight line next to the road. That is the eastern wall. Now look directly, there's these shadows on the ground. That is where the eastern entrance would have been going to the temple, because we know the entrance of the temple was facing which way? East. And then where we see the cupola of the chain, that is where the sacrifices were made. So, okay, grab our little man. I'm going to drop him. Okay, right here, that's the Dome of the Rock. This little building out front is that cupola where the sacrifices were made, okay? And the entrance to the temple was right where those double doors are, right in the very middle. Okay, and the temple was taller than this, so it was double this size of the Golden Dome, so it was probably reaching up to right here. It was overlooking everything. The palace was overlooking everything. And when we turn around and we can see from these gates, you can look straight across. There is the Garden of Gethsemane. That is where Jesus was taken into captivity. There is a little building, a little church over in this area. I think it's this one right here, where they think that Jesus looked at Jerusalem and he wept. He wept for the city. And you can see, if he was standing right there and he was looking this way, he would see the temple. Why is this place so important that they're fighting about it today? This was Solomon's temple. To this day, they are still fighting over it. I'm going to show you an inside picture of what's inside the Dome of the Rock. If you'll let me. It did it for me earlier. It's not. Okay, so what's inside the Dome of the Rock is literally a rock, a foundation. Why is that so important to Muslims right now? Does anybody know why? Why is it a holy place? Why is it a holy place? Does anybody know? Because they think that is where Muhammad ascended into heaven. They think that is where Muhammad ascended into heaven, was at the Dome of the Rock, which is sitting right on top of Solomon's temple. There is a really great YouTube video that I watched earlier today. Israel, My People, that is the channel. If you just Google search road from Upper Room to Gethsemane, it's the very first video, and it's like an hour long. This guy journeys. He's a converted, he's a Messianic Jew, lives in Jerusalem, and takes a walking tour of all of these stops. And he'll take you right inside the Dome of the Rock, not inside of it, but right outside, because only Muslims can go into the Dome of the Rock, right outside in this whole courtyard area, and explain everything for you. And it's very, very educational to see. So during all this place, the temple was over here. Herod's palace, all of that is over in this area. We're going to look at the only really remaining area, the Western Wall, that we know is for sure. You've probably seen it on the news and things of that sort. This is the Western Wall. We know for sure this is one of the walls that the Romans did not destroy in 70 AD. This was part of Solomon's temple. That's the Wailing Wall, the same place. The Western Wall is the Wailing Wall. They will have their prayers, and they'll write them and put them inside of the cracks. Now, here is a place called the Via Dolorosa. This is the street, and we're not going to look at it, but this is the street. Why not? This is part of the street where they think that Jesus walked down with the cross. When he was headed to Golgotha, he was walking down, and people were lined up, spitting there. Of course, these buildings weren't here at that moment. They were spitting at him, all of that. During this time, though, Jesus had to be imprisoned. And what you think of a prison is not what they thought of what a prison was. So let's look at this possible prison that Jesus was at. Of course, a church is built on top of it right now. Just like all the other holy sites, every other holy site, there is a church built right on top of it. I mean, it ruins the nature portion. But it's built right on top of this. There is a cave. You'll go inside, see. There's I control my mouse. So there's this church built right on top of this cave. Then we're going to go visit the cave where they think this was an actual prison that was used. Was it where Jesus was held? We don't know, but this was an actual prison that was used. This was the cave. This was the upper portion of the cave. They brought the person that was supposed to be executed or put in prison. They brought them up here, and then let's go down. Oh, we're on the inside. Sorry, we are on the inside. We're on the bottom of this cave. We are where the prisoners were kept. The prisoners were kept down in this area. And how they got them in there was this staircase was not there at the time. This was added in for tourists. There was a square. There was this very little square. What they would do is they would tie you up and they would lower you into this prison. And then when it was your time to come out, they would drop the rope and pull you back up. So this is very possibly where Jesus would have been held in between his trials. I'm not really for sure of the location of that on the map, but that is where they would have held him. Then we go out to Golgotha. So right here in the middle was the Via Dolorosa, and we're going to go to the first traditional site. I thought I put a little star there to see it. I was totally off. So right here was the Golgotha. What does Golgotha stand for? Place of the skull. You're going to see why this one might not really be where Jesus was crucified. So we're going to look at this church. So inside, you'll see everything's built up around it. Very, very, very colorful. Right here, you step down into where they think Jesus might have been buried. That might have been the tomb area. I mean, they made a market out of all of this. In fact, even today, there are, if you do these street views and you go around, you will see these little relics being sold all over the place. Were they there when you were there? Relics, like, tourist trap. That's what exactly. So see, this is the first traditional site that they think, and then we're going to go over. This is why this is probably not the place, because there's nothing around it that resembles a skull or a place. Now you will look at the Gordon's Garden tomb that Dad was talking about. Orthodox. This is the garden tomb. This is the tomb that they think, this is why we kind of think that Jesus was actually buried in this general vicinity. Is it? We don't know. It doesn't look like a skull. We will see that later. But this is the tomb portion of the garden tomb. Now let me take you right outside to where the skull portion might actually be. Okay, do you see all of these buses, these tour buses? It is a tourist trap. No, we don't know where the actual locations are. It's fun to think about. It's fun to really think about this area. Right here, and we'll get right there to that. Right here, this is where they think it is a skull. Does it look like it? Not right now. It doesn't look like it. But let me show you this picture from there. Okay, this is what it looks like right now. And this is what it looked like back in the 60s or so. Does that kind of look like a skull? Dark eyes right there, area, place of the skull. And the garden tomb is not very far from that location. This is why a lot of theologians actually think this was the area. They also think that when we think about Jesus on the cross, we think, and we've seen the Passion of the Christ, that he's on this hill, like he was on top of the skull. More than likely, what would have happened with the Romans doing crucifixions, they wanted to make an example out of those criminals. So they wouldn't put him up high where people had to strain up and look. They were going to put them at eye level. So where these buses are, and this is one of my professors at seminary that gives tours there 3 times a year. Well, he explained it, and it made a whole lot of sense to me. So where these buses were, that is more than likely where the crucifixion would have taken place, in front of the skull. because you would have these three criminals on this cross, and when people are walking by and a mother is holding a child walking by, they would see them on the cross right there making an example out of them, and they would just keep going on. Instead of, if it was on top of this hill, it would be hard for them to see. So take that as you will. I think it's very interesting to see it's at eye level and then where the crowd would have been, instead of having to traverse this big hill to get over to it. Now we're going to look at, not very far away, is the tomb that he was talking about. See if we can go inside. Gotta look around. Okay. So there's where you see this tomb area, this openness where they would go inside. Up around here there's a wine press. A wine press that was outside. This was an actual garden, like Dad was saying. So somebody rich would have owned it. And you have to stoop. You have to stoop in there. Like stooping is lowering of your head, going inside. It could have been round. It could have been... Round was the most common, yeah, because round is like a wheel. It moves. But here is on the inside of the tomb. A tomb was only used, it was used multiple times. Once a tomb was used for a little bit, they would come back later on after the body started to decompose, and they would gather up the bones and collect them and put them in this box or something, and then leave them somewhere else inside of this tomb. Right here is where the body would have been laid, if this was the tomb where Jesus was at. It would have been laid right here. And in family tombs, which this one was, like I said, they would take the bones from the relatives, put them in a box, and then place them somewhere else inside of this tomb and leave them there. This was a decomposition type of thing. Just imagine the smell that it would have happened. But this is inside of it. It's not very tall. Now this is added. You can tell the difference between the rocks and the concrete and plaster upon there. But that's inside. And then when Jesus left, he stayed for 40 days before he ascended to heaven. Where did he ascend at? He went back to where? The Mount of Olives, the Gethsemane area. He went back to this area. Now this is the traditional location. Like I said, I don't know how they came up with this spot because there is nothing around there to really look at. It is just this is where this Ascension Church is. But it is overlooking the temple, where it would make sense that where he was at the Mount of Olives and he did ascend into heaven, he was overlooking the Temple Mount. He was overlooking Jerusalem. Because when he ascends, what's going to happen in the future from even now? He's going to come back. And he's going to establish his kingdom back. There's going to be a new Jerusalem back on earth. Where's it going to be located? I don't know. But there will be also a third temple built over the Dome of the Rock in this location. The Jews will conquer that area, and they're starting to allow them right now. I just saw this on Twitter today, and I failed to mention it to Dad, but I just saw this today on Twitter. Jews right now could not pray on the Temple Mount at all. Within the last few days, Jews have started to come inside, and they were falling to the ground. They were praying and they were worshiping right there. Just within the last few days. Watch this video. Like I said, watch that video. It is an hour long, but it is very, very interesting. And he did this a few months ago, and he shows you walking inside of the temple area. He's walking inside there, and you're seeing, following him, you're seeing the Jews coming in as well. Not inside, but you can get right up to the doors. You can get right up to the doors of the Dome of the Rock, and then right up inside of Al-Aqsa Mosque. You still can't worship inside. Only Muslims can go inside the Dome of the Rock in this other mosque. But on the temple grounds itself, they were falling down and they were praying. So this is the Chapel of Ascension, where they think Jesus would have ascended. Like I said, there's nothing really here. Just some candles on the ground and blocks. So this is inside the Dome of the Rock. Right now, no Jews or Gentiles can even enter into this place. Only Muslims can. But this is what's inside of there. If you've always kind of wondered, this is what is the rock that they are protecting. That's it. It is a mosque. But right now, where this is at, Jews were shown, there were videos, Jews were shown right in this area, bowing down, praying, and singing songs of worship to God. And apparently this is a huge deal. I don't know. But no. But they shut it down because they had it guards. It was only The Jews could only come to a certain portion. I have to go back and rewatch that video. But the Jews could only go to what he was showing, this little portion. This little portion right there. That is the only spot where they could go. It's controlled. Now you can go all around. The only places you can't go in, you cannot go in here, and you cannot go in there. But other than that, this is free game for everybody.
See, in 96, they would let you come in, you could go in. And right in here is a place where you could put your shoes, you had to take your shoes off and go in then. And that's where I stood and watched because I didn't care anything about that abomination. And I stood up there and looked out across to the Mount of Olives and all. And that's what I want to see. But see, that's changed since, I'll tell you something.
But if you looked at that last photo when we looked inside the Temple Mount or inside the Dome of the Rock. In fact, I'll show you again. I think that's the right one. If you look right in here, this is just a rock. That's just a rock, and this is where Muslims think that Muhammad ascended into heaven. Remember one thing about Satan. Satan likes to copy truth, but yet he also likes to twist it a little bit. Started at the very beginning with Adam and Eve. What? Abraham offered up Isaac, yeah. So there is a quick flyby and a little visit to some of the locations that you're going to be reading about in the next few weeks here in John. We have so I'm going to stop the streaming and stop the recording.